She didn't cry. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She just walked. Cameras were flashing. Reporters were screaming her name from every direction. The whole world felt like it was closing in. But Maria Shriver stepped out of that front door, no makeup, hair undone, sunglasses barely covering eyes that had clearly seen too many sleepless nights, and she kept moving. One step. Then another. Head up. And in that moment, without a single word, she said everything. Because just days before that walk, the story had broken wide open. A secret that had been buried for over a decade, buried right inside their own home, had finally surfaced. The man she had given everything to, her career, her independence, 2 decades of her life, had fathered a child with another woman. A woman who had worked in their house for years. A child now old enough to look back and understand what had been hidden. The world stopped. The tabloids exploded. Twitter couldn't breathe. Everyone had something to say, everyone had an opinion, everyone was talking. Everyone except Maria. For weeks, she stayed completely silent. And the longer that silence lasted, the louder everything around her became. People started asking, was she falling apart behind closed doors? Was she protecting him? Or was something far more complicated going on beneath the surface? But here's the thing nobody saw coming. When Maria finally broke that silence, what she said didn't just shock people. It made them rethink everything they thought they understood about her. To understand why this hit so hard, you have to understand who Maria Shriver actually is. Because she was never just a celebrity wife. Not even close. She was born into American royalty. Her mother, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, was the sister of President John F. Kennedy. Her father was a diplomat who ran for vice president. Growing up inside the Kennedy family wasn't glamorous, it was serious. It was pressure. It was the weight of legacy. Sitting on your shoulders before you even knew what legacy meant. Service wasn't encouraged in that household. It was required. But Maria didn't coast on the family name. She fought for her own place in the world. She worked her way up through local newsrooms, grinding through long hours and thankless assignments, until she landed at NBC, one of the biggest news platforms in the country. She became a co-anchor on the Today Show. A correspondent for NBC Nightly News. She wasn't a Kennedy on television. She was a journalist. And then Arnold walked in. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the kind of person who shouldn't have existed. A bodybuilder who became a Hollywood icon. An action star who became the governor of California. In any rational world, that career arc makes no sense. And yet there he was, larger than life, completely magnetic, utterly impossible to ignore. When he and Maria started dating in the early 1980s, people genuinely didn't know what to make of it. A Kennedy woman and a Republican action star? It seemed ridiculous. It seemed like it couldn't last. But it did. They married in 1986. They built a family, 4 children, a beautiful home, a life that looked from the outside like it had been perfectly designed. And when Arnold decided to run for governor of California in 2003, Maria made a choice that said everything about where she stood. She paused her career. The career she had built herself, from nothing, with her own name. She stood on those stages. She gave speeches. She looked into cameras and she vouched for him, completely, publicly, without hesitation. California trusted Arnold partly because Maria was standing beside him. Her credibility became his credibility. Her reputation became his shield. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, something was very, very wrong. But nobody saw it coming. At least not publicly. The first signs appeared in early 2011. Arnold had just finished his second term as governor. He and Maria released a short joint. People assumed it was stress. The pressure of politics. The adjustment of leaving office after years of public life. These things happen. Marriages go through hard seasons. Nobody panicked. And then the Los Angeles Times published a story that changed everything. Arnold Schwarzenegger had fathered a child with a woman who had been part of their household for over 20 years. The child wasn't a baby. The child was a teenager. Old enough to have been around. Old enough to have been seen. And Maria, the woman who gave speeches for him, who stood in front of millions and staked her own name on his character, reportedly had no idea. The story didn't just spread. It detonated. This wasn't a rumor. It wasn't speculation. Arnold confirmed it himself, in a public statement, acknowledging the child and expressing what he called deep regret. But here's what made it unbearable to watch. Maria still said nothing. Publicly. Not a word. The tabloids went absolutely wild. Sources were leaking from every direction. Some said she was completely blindsided, devastated beyond words. Others claimed she had sensed something for years but pushed it down, for the kids, for the career, for the image. Neither version was kind to her. Neither version gave her peace. Her closest friends gathered around her. Her family closed ranks. But Maria herself stayed quiet. And then something unexpected happened. That silence started to change how people saw her. People who had once seen her as the polished, dutiful political wife were starting to see something else entirely, a woman who was enduring something enormous, without breaking. Without performing her pain for the cameras. Without giving the world the meltdown it was quietly waiting for. Behind the scenes, sources said she was focused on one thing. Not revenge. Not lawyers. Not press statements. Her children. She moved out of the family home and into a rental nearby, close enough to keep the kids' routines exactly the same. She was seen at school pickups. At soccer games. At church. Living her actual life, steadily, while the world narrated it from the outside. But then came the detail that shifted everything again. People close to Maria revealed she had known something was wrong for a long time. Not the full truth. But enough. Enough to feel the fractures. Enough to sense the distance that couldn't be explained by politics or busy schedules or the ordinary friction of a long marriage. And yet she had stayed. She had shown up. Day after day. She had held the family together at a cost that nobody outside that house could fully measure. Which raised a question that nobody could stop asking: why? That question hung in the air for months. And then, slowly, Maria started to resurface. She began writing again. Personal pieces. Honest, raw essays about identity and loss and what it means to completely rebuild yourself when the life you thought you had turns out to be something different. She admitted something that caught people off guard. She said she had lost herself in the marriage. She had built her entire identity around Arnold's career, Arnold's ambitions, Arnold's journey. And somewhere deep inside that process, she had stopped being her own person. The journalist who fought for her seat at the table. The woman who had her own voice, her own vision, her own name. She had slowly disappeared. And millions of people heard that, and recognized it. Women who had done the same thing. Women who had made themselves smaller to hold something else together. Women who had woken up one day and looked in the mirror and genuinely didn't know who was looking back. Maria Shriver had become something she never planned to be. A mirror. Her children were navigating all of this in real time, caught between two parents they loved, watching their family fracture on a global stage. Her son Patrick later spoke about it with striking honesty, describing the confusion and the grief of that period with a clarity that was almost painful to read. And through all of it, Maria never publicly attacked Arnold. She never went on television to list what he'd done wrong. She never gave the burning quote that every tabloid was desperate to print. That restraint was either the most extraordinary act of grace anyone had ever seen, or it was the most quietly devastating thing she could have done to him. And then, finally, she gave the interview. The world leaned forward. Everyone expected tears. Maybe barely contained fury. At minimum, the kind of measured condemnation celebrities deliver when they want to seem dignified while still landing a blow. What they got was something no one had prepared for. Maria talked about forgiveness. Not the easy kind. Not the polished, "I've moved on and I wish him well" version that celebrities use to seem above it all. She talked about forgiveness as a battle. Something she had to crawl toward. Something she chose not for Arnold, but for herself. She said carrying hatred was a weight she wasn't willing to carry. Realization of how long she had ignored her own instincts. How many times she had pushed down what she felt in her gut, to keep the peace, to protect the image, to hold the family together at her own expense. And then she said something that made the room go completely quiet. She said she was grateful. Not for the affair. Not for the pain. But for what the unraveling had forced her to become. She said she never would have found herself, the real version, the honest version, if everything hadn't fallen apart first. The interviewer paused. The audience paused. Because nobody in that room expected gratitude from a woman who had been publicly humiliated on a global scale. Nobody expected her to look into that camera and say, with complete sincerity, that the worst thing that ever happened to her had also, in some deeply complicated way, set her free. And that is what nobody had been prepared for. Today, Maria Shriver is arguably more powerful than she has ever been in her life. She built a media platform focused on women, purpose, and mental well-being. She became a New York Times best-selling author. She advocates fiercely for Alzheimer's research in honor of her late father. She shows up, consistently, quietly, completely on her own terms. The divorce from Arnold was eventually finalized after years of proceedings handled largely away from the spotlight. And Arnold himself, in interviews since, has acknowledged what he put her through. He called it his greatest personal failure. He said Maria deserved better. She never publicly said, "I told you so." She said the most painful part of everything wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was she didn't need to. Maria Shriver walked out of one of the most humiliating public betrayals in modern Hollywood history, and she didn't collapse. She didn't perform. She didn't become bitter. She became more fully herself than she had been in years. Whether you call that strength, or grace, or something only she fully understands, one thing is impossible to deny. The woman who stepped out of that house in Brentwood, sunglasses on, head up, moving forward without looking back. She already knew exactly where she was going. So what do you think? Was Maria Shriver's response the most powerful thing she could have done, or does it leave you with more questions than answers? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We genuinely want to hear from you. And if this story hit you the way it hit us. If you believe that silence can sometimes be the loudest thing in the room, you know what to do. Subscribe. Because we go deeper than the headlines. Every single time.